Last Judgment was the pivot of the Christian, as of the Jewish and the Muslim faith. The belief in the second advent of Christ and the end of the world, as preludes to the judgment, had survived the disappointments of the apostles, the passing of the year 1000, and the fears and hopes of 40 generations. It had become less vivid in general, but it had not died. Wise men, said Roger Bacon in 1271, considered the end of the world to be near. Every great epidemic or disaster, every earthquake or comet or other extraordinary event was looked upon as heralding the end of the world. But even if the world continued, the souls and bodies of the dead would be resurrected at once to face their judge. The early Christian theory that all judgment of the dead would be postponed till the doomsday of the end of the world had been replaced by the doctrine that every person would be judged immediately after his death. Men hoped vaguely for heaven, but vividly feared hell. There was much tenderness in medieval Christianity, probably more than in any other religion in history. But the Catholic, like the early Protestant theology and preaching, felt called upon to stress the terror of hell. Christ was to this age no gentle Jesus, meek and mild, but the stern avenger of every mortal sin. Nearly all churches showed some representation of Christ the Judge. Many had pictures of the Last Judgment, and these portrayed the tortures of the damned more prominently than the bliss of the saved. St. Methodius, we are told, converted King Boris of Bulgaria by painting a picture of hell on the wall of the royal palace. Many mystics claimed to have had visions of hell and described its geography and terror. The monk Tundal, in the 12th century, reported exquisite details. In the center of hell, he said, the devil was bound to a burning gridiron by red-hot chains. His screams of agony never ended. His hands were free and reached out and seized the damned. His teeth crushed them like grapes. His fiery breath drew them down his burning throat. Assistant demons with hooks of iron plunged the bodies of the damned alternately into fire or icy water, or hung them up by the tongue, or sliced them with a saw, or beat them flat on an anvil, or boiled them, or strained them through a cloth. Sulfur was mixed with the fire in order that a vile stench might be added to the discomforts of the damned. But the fire gave no light, so that a horrible darkness shrouded the incalculable diversity of pains. The Church herself gave no official location or description of hell, but she frowned upon men who, like Origen, doubted the reality of its material fires. The purpose of the doctrine would have been frustrated by its mitigation. St. Thomas Aquinas held that the fire which will torment the bodies of the damned is corporeal, and located hell in the lowest part of the earth. To common medieval imagination, and to such men as Gregory the Great, the devil was no figure of speech, but a life-and-blood reality prowling about everywhere, suggesting temptations and creating all kinds of evil. He could usually be sent packing by a dash of holy water or the sign of the cross, but he left an awful odor of burning sulfur behind him. He was a great admirer of women, used their smiles and charms as bait to lure his victims, and occasionally won their favors, if the ladies themselves might be believed. So a woman of Toulouse admitted that she had frequently slept with Satan, and had at the age of 53 given birth through his services to a monster with a wolf's head and a serpent's tail. The devil had an immense cohort of assistant demons, who hovered around every soul and persistently maneuvered to lead it into sin. They, too, liked to lie as incubi with careless or lonely or holy women. The monk Richard described them as filling the whole world. The whole air is but a thick mass of devils, always and everywhere in wait for us. It is marvelous that any one of us should be alive. Were it not for God's grace, no one of us could escape. Practically everybody, including the philosophers, believed in this multitude of demons. But a saving sense of humor tempered this demonology, and most healthy males looked upon the little devils rather as poltergeist mischief-makers than as objects of terror. Such demons, it was believed, intruded audibly but invisibly into conversations, cut holes in people's garments, and threw dirt at passers-by. One tired demon sat on a head of lettuce and was inadvertently eaten by a nun. More alarming was the doctrine that many are called but few are chosen. See Matthew chapter 22, verse 14. Orthodox theologians, Mohammedan as well as Christian, held that the vast majority of the human race would go to hell. Most Christian theologians took literally the statement ascribed to Christ. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth shall not be damned. Mark chapter 16, verse 16. St. Augustine reluctantly concluded that infants dying before being baptized went to hell. St. Anselm thought that the damnation of unbaptized infants, vicariously guilty through the sin of Adam and Eve, was no more unreasonable than the slave status of children born to slaves, which he considered reasonable. The Church softened the doctrine by teaching that unbaptized infants went not to hell, but to limbo, infernus puerorum, where their only suffering was the pain of the loss of paradise. Most Christians believed that all Muslims, and most Muslims, Mohammed accepted, believed that all Christians would go to hell, and it was generally accepted that all heathen were damned. The Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 declared that no man could be saved outside the universal church. Pope Gregory IX condemned as heresy Raymond Lully's hope that God hath such love for his people that almost all men will be saved, since, if more were damned than saved, Christ's mercy would be without great love. No other prominent churchman allowed himself to believe or say that the saved would outnumber the damned. Berthold of Regensburg, one of the most famous and popular preachers of the 13th century, reckoned the proportion of the damned to the saved as 100,000 to 1. St. Thomas Aquinas thought that in this also doth God's mercy chiefly appear, that he raiseth a few to that salvation wherefrom very many fail. Volcanoes were supposed by many to be the mouths of hell. Their rumbling was a faint echo of the moans of the damned, and Gregory the Great argued that the crater of Etna was daily widening to receive the enormous number of souls that were fated to be damned. The congested bowels of the earth held in their hot embrace the great majority of all the human beings that had ever been born. From that hell there would be no respite nor escape through all eternity. Said Berthold, "Count the sands of the seashore, or the hairs that have grown on man or beast since Adam. Reckon a year of torment for each grain or hair, and that span of time would hardly represent the beginning of the agony of the condemned." The last moment of a man's life was decisive for all eternity, and the fear that that final moment might find one sinful and unshrived lay heavy on men's souls.